30 years in almost complete isolation. No phone, no internet, no nearby town. Just you, a spiral staircase of cold stone, a single room at the top of a tower, and an ocean that tries to smash ships into the rocks every single night. Your only duty is simple on paper and brutal in reality. The light must never go out. If it fails, even for a few minutes, a ship you will never see may never make it home. For thousands of people, this was not a story in a book. This was their everyday life. Almost no one remembers them. This is the story of the last lighthouse keepers, and of how their world vanished within one human lifetime. Before satellites and glowing blue dots on screens, before navigation apps could tell you exactly where you are, there were lights on the edge of the world. Lighthouses marked the most dangerous places on the coast, hidden reefs, narrow channels, and jagged rocks that could tear open the hull of a ship in seconds. For sailors returning home through storm and fog, these towers were not just landmarks. They were promises. Every lighthouse had its own rhythm of light, 2 quick flashes and a pause, or a single slow beam sweeping across the horizon. If you recognized the pattern, you knew where you were and how far you were from safety. But a lighthouse is more than a tower and a lens. It is a living system. That system depended on one person, the keeper. For a lighthouse keeper, the day did not start with sunrise. It started long before that, when the rest of the world was still asleep. Night was their shift. Dawn was their clock-out time. As the first hint of light appeared on the horizon, the keeper checked the lamp one last time. The flame, or later, the electric bulb, had been burning since sunset. They watched the sky carefully. Too early, and ships could be left in darkness. Too late, and the light would waste precious fuel. At the exact moment when the sun was strong enough for captains to see the coastline with their own eyes, the keeper extinguished the light. Then the real work began. The lens had to be cleaned every single day. Salt from sea spray, soot from the old oil lamps. Even a single fingerprint could weaken the beam. The great glass prisms of the Fresnel lens were like the heart of the lighthouse, fragile, precise, and unforgiving. The keeper wiped each surface by hand, turned the lens slowly, checked every panel for cracks or chips. Next came the mechanism that made the light rotate. In older towers, it was a clockwork system driven by heavy weights on chains. The keeper had to wind it by hand, like a giant grandfather clock. If they wound it too little, the light would stop turning in the middle of the night. If they wound it too much, the pattern of flashes would be wrong, and ships would misread the signal. At offshore and remote lighthouses, the workday was divided into 4-hour watches. 2 in the morning to 6, 6 to 10, 10 to 2 in the afternoon, then 2 to 6, 6 to 10 at night, and 10 at night until 2 in the morning again. 3 keepers working in rotation, around the clock, every single day of the year. The keeper on the 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. watch was also on the 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. watch. Week after week. The same rhythm, never changing. On Sundays, the watches rotated so one person wouldn't be stuck with the worst shift forever. But even that small mercy had its cost. Your body never quite adjusted. You learned to sleep in pieces, a few hours here, a few hours there, always listening for the sound of the bell that meant your turn was coming. During fog, the routine doubled. One keeper operated the fog signal, a deep, mechanical groan that sounded every 20 seconds, warning ships they were close to the rocks. The other tended the light. In prolonged fog, each keeper worked 16-hour shifts, no rest, no breaks. Just the signal, the light, and the knowledge that lives depended on staying awake. And if the relief boat was delayed by weather, which happened often, there was no going home. You stayed. You kept the light. Because that was the job. The technical work was demanding. But the hardest part of the job was not mechanical. It was psychological. Many lighthouses stood on small islands or remote rocky points, far from any village or harbor. Days could pass without a single visitor. Weeks could go by without seeing any face other than your own reflection in the glass. The only constant companions were the wind, the waves, and the creak of the tower as it shifted under the pressure of the sea. Some keepers worked entirely alone. Others had one assistant, and they took turns staying awake at night. They invented routines not because they loved order, but because routine was a shield against loneliness. They wrote page after page in diaries. They talked to the birds that landed on the gallery railings. They collected shells, driftwood, and strange objects washed up by the tide. The world outside moved forward, cities growing, cars filling the roads, radios, television, computers. Inside the lighthouse, time moved in circles, light on at sunset, light off at sunrise. Day after day, year after year. For some, the isolation was a burden. For others, it was a kind of freedom. They were apart from the noise of the world, but they were never pointless. Every night, they could look out at the dark horizon and know that somewhere beyond it, a captain was watching their light and trusting it. Imagine what goes through your mind when you are alone for that long. The first few weeks, you might think about the life you left behind, your family, your friends, the sounds of the city. But slowly, those memories start to feel distant, like scenes from someone else's life. You start talking to yourself, not because you're losing your mind, but because silence has weight. Winds picking up from the west, you might say out loud, even though no one is listening. Lens looks good today. That ship is cutting it close. The words fill the push back against the emptiness. Some keepers developed a kind of inner conversation, a quiet debate with themselves about small decisions. Should I repaint the railings this week or next? Should I fix the door hinge now or after lunch? It sounds trivial, but when every day is the same, these small choices become anchors. They remind you that you still have agency, that you still matter, even if no one else sees you. And on the hardest nights, when the storm is so loud you can barely hear yourself think, some keepers would stand at the top of the tower and shout into the wind. Not words, just sound. A way of saying, I am still here. I am still human. I am still doing this. Not every lighthouse was a place of total solitude. Some were home to entire families. Imagine growing up in a tower. Your backyard is a ring of concrete high above the sea. Your playground is a spiral staircase. You learn to walk with one hand on the wall because the tower sways in strong winds. You fall asleep to the sound of waves and the steady rotation of the light passing your bedroom window. There is no school bus. Your classroom is the kitchen table. Your teacher might be your mother, who is also the nurse, the cook, and sometimes the assistant keeper. You don't have neighborhood kids to play with, but you know every stone on the island by heart. Holidays are quiet but unforgettable. On winter nights, ships passing in the distance might sound their horns as a greeting to the family in the tower. Sometimes a captain would throw a sealed bottle or small package overboard with sweets or a letter inside, hoping the waves would carry it to the rocks near the lighthouse. Birthdays were marked not by big parties, but by a clear night, a warm meal, and the knowledge that the light did its job once again. But danger was always close. If someone got seriously ill, there was no quick ride to the hospital. You looked at the water and hoped the sea would be calm enough for a boat to reach you in time. Storms did not care about human schedules or emergencies. And some of the hardest moments came when the family could see a ship in trouble battling the waves below, but could not do anything except keep the light burning, as bright and steady as possible. In that mix of pride, fear, routine, and responsibility, a very specific type of person was formed. Someone who understood both how small a human is and how much one person can still matter. One woman who grew up in a lighthouse later described what it was like to be a child in that world. Her father was a principal keeper. The family moved from station to station, following his assignments. By the time she was 11, She had lived in 4 different lighthouses. At one station, the lighthouse stood at the top of a cliff. To get home from school, she and her brother had to walk down 409 steps carved into the rock. In winter, when the stairs were covered in ice, their mother would meet them halfway with a lantern. At another station, the lighthouse was on a small island accessible only by boat. During storms, the family could be cut off from the mainland for weeks. She learned Morse code from her father and helped him send weather reports to the Coast Guard by signal lamp. She watched convoys pass during wartime, sometimes seeing ships under attack far out on the horizon. There was nothing they could do except keep the light steady and hope it was enough. Years later, she said the hardest part was not the isolation. It was leaving. Every time her father was reassigned, the family had to pack up and start over somewhere new. New rocks, new waves, new rhythms of light. She never had a hometown. She never had roots in one place. But she had something else, a deep understanding of what it means to be responsible for something bigger than yourself, even as a child. For a long time, it was easy to believe that lighthouse keeping would last forever. Ships needed lights. Lights needed keepers. But slowly, almost silently, the tools of navigation began to change. Electric lamps replaced open flames. Automatic switches replaced manual ones. Solar panels started feeding power into batteries. At first, keepers still had work. They cleaned the lenses. They checked the circuits. They kept the logbooks. But then navigation itself moved away from human senses. Radios began to send signals from the shore. Screens appeared on ship bridges, showing glowing blips for coastlines and other vessels. And then satellites arrived. Ships could suddenly know their exact position on the planet without ever seeing a lighthouse beam. The light on the rocks became one signal among many, useful, but no longer the only one. On land, people who never saw the sea sat at desks and ran the numbers. An automated lighthouse did not need a salary. It did not need food or medical care or a boat to bring supplies. It did not get lonely. It did not complain. It just turned on and off exactly when it was told to, powered by sunlight and monitored by distant control centers. One by one, the decision was made. This station will operate without a keeper. Then the next one, and the next. For the men and women who had spent their lives in these towers, the end did not come with an explosion or a dramatic final night. It came with a letter, a meeting, a quiet conversation. Thank you for your service. The system can run itself now. For the world, this was progress. For the keepers, it felt like being gently pushed out of history. The automation process began in the late 1960s, but most lighthouses remained manned through the 1980s and into the 1990s. By 1990, nearly every lighthouse in the world operated without a keeper. The last Scottish lighthouse to be automated was Fair Isle South. In March 1998, the last keeper stood in the lamp room one final time, looked out at the sea he had watched for decades, and turned off the light for the last time himself. Then he locked the door and walked down the stairs. There was no ceremony, no crowd, no final speech. Just a man leaving a building that no longer needed him. Some keepers adapted. They found other work. They moved to cities, learned new skills, built new lives. But for others, the loss was deeper. One former keeper later said that for the first few years after automation, he would wake up in the middle of the night in a panic, thinking he had missed his watch. His body still remembered the rhythm, the 4-hour shifts, the sound of the mechanism turning, the weight of the responsibility. But there was no tower to climb anymore, no light to tend, no ship depending on him. He described it as a kind of grief, not for the job itself, but for the sense of purpose that came with it. I used to matter, he said. Now I'm just another person no one needs. Today, when people talk about automation and AI, they often speak in numbers. How many jobs will be lost? How many new jobs will be created? how much money will be saved. It can feel abstract until you remember that we have seen this pattern before. Lighthouse keepers were replaced not because they were bad at their jobs, but because new tools seemed safer, cheaper, and more efficient. No one set out to erase a way of life. They set out to prevent shipwrecks and save money, and yet an entire profession disappeared. An entire culture of work, with its own skills, rituals, and stories, became a footnote. Today, as algorithms write, design, translate, and analyze, many people in offices and studios feel a similar unease. They ask themselves, quietly, if a machine can do this faster and cheaper, how long will the world still need me? The story of the Lighthouse is not an argument against technology. Modern navigation has made the sea far less deadly. But it is a reminder that every time we let a machine take over a human task, we should ask another question too. What are we losing besides inefficiency? What happens to the people whose skills no longer fit into the new world? What happens to their sense of purpose and to their stories? Look around you right now. Graphic designers are watching I generate logos in seconds. Translators are seeing their work replaced by neural networks. Customer service agents are being replaced by chatbots. Even radiologists, people who spent a decade training, are watching algorithms detect tumors faster than they can. The pattern is the same. First, the technology arrives as a tool to help you. Then it becomes good enough to work alongside you. Then, quietly, it becomes good enough to replace you. And the people making those decisions sit in boardrooms far away, looking at spreadsheets, not at faces. They don't see the decades of skill. They don't hear the pride in your voice when you talk about your work. They see a line item, a cost that can be reduced. The lighthouse keeper knew this feeling. One day, you are essential. The next day, you are expensive. And the hardest part is that no one is lying to you. That technology really is better in some ways. It really does cost less. It really does make fewer mistakes. But better and cheaper are not the only things that matter. Somewhere in the push for efficiency, what does it do to a person to be told they are no longer needed? What does it do to a society when entire categories of work simply vanish? And who decides which skills are worth preserving and which can be deleted in the name of progress? If you visit a lighthouse today, you might climb the same spiral stairs a keeper once climbed every day of their life. You might stand in the empty lamp room, where someone used to polish the lens by hand and watch the horizon through long winter nights. You might read a small plaque with a few dates and a couple of names. But most of the people who kept those lights alive will remain anonymous. They did a job that mattered deeply and then quietly vanished with it. In a world rushing toward automation, their story is more than nostalgia. It is a reminder that a society is built not only on its brightest inventions, but also on the invisible work of ordinary people who take responsibility when no one is watching. A lighthouse keeper was one of those people. Night after night, year after year, they climbed the stairs, wound the mechanism, cleaned the glass, and kept the light burning so that strangers far out at sea could find their way home. As we step deeper into the age of satellites and AI, maybe the most important thing we can do is not to romanticize their past, but to learn from their disappearance. To remember that somewhere, right now, there are people doing work that feels permanent and essential, until one day it suddenly isn't, and to ask ourselves, before the tide of progress washes over them too, will anyone still tell their stories once the lights are gone? I want to ask you something. Think about the work you do, or the work your parents do, or the work you want to do someday. Is it the kind of work that could be automated? Not now, maybe, but in 5 years, 10? And if the answer is yes, what then? Do we just accept it? Do we call it progress and move on? Or do we start asking harder questions? Who benefits when a job disappears? Who gets left behind? And what responsibility do we have to the people whose livelihoods are being quietly erased? The lighthouse keepers are gone. But their story is not over, because right now, all over the world, there are people standing in towers of their own, doing work they believe in, work they trained for, work that gives their life meaning, and they can feel the ground shifting beneath them. The question is not whether technology will keep advancing. It will. The question is whether we will remember that every line of code, every algorithm, every efficiency gain has a human cost, and whether we will choose to honor the people who came before by making sure their stories and their struggles are not forgotten. Because if we don't tell these stories, who will? And when the last light goes dark and the last keeper walks away, will anyone even notice they were there?